Need your daily fix on mixed martial arts?
We're going to kind of recap Bellator 155
from UFC 198.
Who's who?
Kind of a controversial decision.
And who's not?
I couldn't figure out why, and then it hit me.
Well, don't you fret, because Golden State Media Concepts got you covered. Get your daily dose of MMA podcasts. Everything from the UFC, Bellator Fighting Championship, Extreme Cage Fighting, Invicta Fighting Championships, and so much more. Join us as we talk about some of the biggest names in mixed martial arts. We've got you covered here on Golden State Media Concepts MMA Podcast.
Thank you for tuning into the GSMC MMA podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Arnaud De Leon, and hopefully you are doing well for yourself. Whether you live in the States or internationally, you are healthy, you, your friends, your family, you are all healthy during this time of major uncertainty. Currently, as a resident of California, I myself am really unsure of what to expect in California. Northern California doesn't want to reopen up till much, much later. LA County might be reopening up this week. Maybe. And so no one knows what exactly is happening. All the schools, all the mayors, and even representatives in our government in California are not sure when exactly California is going to reopen up. So if you're a resident in California, hopefully things are going well for you. But I'm a wee bit happy, despite living here, in that UFC 249 is finally happening. I've been waiting for this card for a while now. I want it to happen. I miss my mixed martial arts. I am in desperate need of watching MMA shows. You know what I've been doing? I've been watching old UFC shows. I've been watching UFC 1, UFC 73, and I really want to watch the new up-to-date fights that are happening right now. And I'm just really excited. So we got the main event here being Justin Gaethje versus Tony Ferguson. Co-main event is going to be Henry Cejudo versus returning Dominic Cruz. We got two title fights happening in Jacksonville, Florida. And on top of that, we got multiple UFC MMA events happening in the month of May. So I'm going to be stuck watching a whole lot of mixed martial arts. I went through a drought. We as MMA fans went through a drought of no fighting, no mixed martial arts. We're stuck watching replays of baseball, basketball, or whatever. And now we can actually watch our MMA show and be like, yeah, finally, some real action, some fun happening here. Finally. I'm just really excited for it, and I absolutely cannot wait. But UFC, if you go follow Dana White on Twitter, it was finally released it was finally released for the show opening for UFC 249. Narrated by Ron Perlman, and it's really hyped up. It's got me hyped up, really, man. I think Ron Perlman is a really bad, tough guy. He's a really cool dude. He's out there talking about these fighters. He's talking about how Tony Ferguson is like the master of all angles. And then you got Justin Gaethje, this guy who he's had 7 performance of the night bonuses, which is insane. He's had 7, which. If you were to have 7 of those, and then each of those at the very least would grant him an extra 50K, the dude pretty much made nearly $500,000 purely through Fight of the Night bonuses, which is insane. Which I think might be a record. It might be a record, but yeah, the dude has pretty much made double, if not triple, times as much money as he should be making, based off having these incredible performances. And I respect him for that. I really do. Justin Gaethje is one of those complicated fighters that you're unsure whether or not you should like, or whether or not you should like. It's strange. I think everybody generally says like, oh man, I love watching a Justin Gaethje fight. But then you also have some MMA purists out there like Joe Rogan and like Brandon Schaub who say, you know what, I love watching a Justin Gaethje match, but Justin Gaethje shouldn't be fighting that. Because Justin Gaethje for being as good as wrestler as he is, and for as good as having like his timing and his angling of shots and his boxing ability, the dude has a tendency of like eating shots. I remember watching a video on MMA on Point, and a lot of other analysts were talking about Justin Gaethje, and the analysis for Justin Gaethje was that Justin Gaethje felt like that he is a fighter from the late 90s. And that he fights kind of like a meathead. Because in most UFC fights, whether or not people... Okay, here's the thing. a lot of us like fans, we love to see fights like Joe Stevenson versus BJ Penn. We love seeing fights like Willie Zhang versus Joanna Jacek, Stephen Bonner versus Forrest Griffin. We love seeing those types of fights, like Diego Sanchez versus Clay Guida is without a doubt my favorite fight of all time in mixed martial arts. If you haven't seen Clay Guida versus Diego Sanchez, watch it. It's 3 rounds of absolute madness. I think in its purest form of like 2 meatheads, 2 warriors battling it out, 2 trained fighters battling out, leaving it all on the line here, just purely by striking. I say without a doubt, you need to watch Clay Guida versus Diego Sanchez. Might not be the most prettiest fight to watch. Actually, I would say it's a really, really ugly fight to watch. And if you were to watch it today, you'd be like, oh yeah, no wonder those 2 guys never like made it far in the UFC. It's because they fight like that. Well, a fighter who's fighting like that right now is Justin Gaethje. If you haven't seen Gaethje versus Michael Johnson, which is a fight I really recommend you guys watch, I really recommend you really watch that. That's probably my favorite performance from a Justin Gaethje fight. But yeah, man, Justin Gaethje, it's weird. There's always been people always speculating, even in the game. So in the UFC 3 game to which Justin Gaethje's in, the commentary team are always talking about how bad it is for Justin Gaethje to fight this certain style of pretty much being, I don't know how to explain it, but pretty much being like a walking statue, and then like he's just going forward. He's getting hit all the time, and he's not giving up. He's always pushing the action. In every fight Justin Gaethje's in, he's always pushing the action, and he's taking whatever. He's putting himself in very bad position. He's putting himself in. Most fighters, if they weren't as tough as Justin Gaethje, would be knocked out and would have gotten 0-7. That's the problem with Gaethje. That if it's not Gaethje and there were other fighters who were fighting exactly like him, all those fighters would end up retiring super early, and they'd lose all their fights. Because theoretically, Justin Gaethje is a bad fighter. Theoretically, in theory. But when you actually see him perform, and you see the end result, you kind of scratch your head and be like, okay, how the heck did a guy who pretty much just went forward, was pretty much a walking statue, like really bad efficiency when it comes to striking, and he's putting himself in these really bad positions where he can be knocked out at any time. What is he doing? And then he wins the fights. So yeah, it's so impressive what Justin Gaethje can do. Like, he really is a fighter from the late 90s. Yeah, he fights super meatheady, but he somehow wins. And there's something respectable about that. It's especially now, especially when you hear Justin Gaethje talk. He's such like a pure, really, really good, nice guy. Maybe because everyone. Okay, so the more I watch mixed martial arts, the more I begin to recognize this. The higher you climb up in the rankings, and especially if you win the title, your fighting style all of a sudden transforms into like Joe Rogan said how like you're a championship style fighter. I remember Amanda Nunes when she fought against Jermaine Randomay, to which Amanda Nunes struggled a lot in her fight against Jermaine Randomay, or when Tyron Woodley fought against Wonderboy Stephen Thompson. The defense was Tyron Woodley and Amanda Nunes were fighting the smart fights. They were fighting like champions, which really puzzled me. So if you're a challenger and you're going head over heels, just going straight forward, throwing everything out there, then you're not being a smart fighter, nor are you fighting like a champion. But if you're fighting slow, if you're fighting methodical, if you're fighting for the decision, even Israel Adesanya, when he fought against Yoel Romero, people were questioning Israel Adesanya, and Adesanya's case was that, yeah, it was a boring fight, but that was the fight I was supposed to fight. Like, that's how I was supposed to fight as a champion. And the defense for him was that, well, Israel Adesanya fought how a champion is supposed to fight. And I find that very interesting, though. Like, who was the last champion who was known? Who was the last champion to defend his or her belt, and was known as a person who was not going to go end the fight via rounds, via like judges? I don't remember really. I really don't. Anderson Silva became that fighter. Like, he went from this guy who knocked out people within just seconds and minutes into a fighter who went for the decision victory. Tyron Woodley definitely became that fighter. Rose Namajunas, here's the ironic part. When Rose Namajunas was champion, you could have said, well, Rose Namajunas fought the wrong fight, fought very unintelligent there. So that was why she lost her belt against Jessica Andrade. And then Jessica Andrade, when she was super aggressive, she got knocked out. So, Man, it's really hard. It's really tough to judge champions and to judge fighters if they don't fight that exciting style. And that's the fun part about this. Just engaging Tony Ferguson, they always fight the fun style. They always fight the style that is not the most prettiest or not the most beautiful or the most attractive thing to look at, except for kind of Ferguson in striking. But if you were to go to a bar and you're with all your friends and you're watching the UFC events with the large group of people, everyone's all drunk, we're all eating food, we're all partying, we're all like talking smack to each other, and then we're seeing this fight happen in the big large screen. At least in my bar, it's a big large screen. Everyone's yelling, "Wow! This is crazy! This is insane! This is so exciting!" And that's what I miss about UFC, and I can't wait to hopefully do it again by Saturday. So you're listening to the GSMC MMA podcast, coming back right after the short break.
You really can't underestimate the importance of having the right creative work for your brand or your product. Whether it's a logo, a website, a book cover, or an ad campaign, you really need a quality design to make that big difference pop and deliver your overall engagement and success in a competitive market. That's where Design Crowd comes in. Design Crowd has over 750,000 designers from Sydney to San Francisco ready to help you with awesome creative ideas. They make crowdsourcing work for you. So if you need a logo or you're working on your creative branding, you can go to designcrowd.com and post a brief describing the design you need. And then within about 2 to 7 days, you'll receive up to over 100 different designs from designers around the world. Then you pick the best design and approve payment to the designer. So you're only paying for the design that you want. It takes a lot of the guesswork out of freelancing and out of crowdsourcing. And you don't have to be a huge company like Harvard Business School to use Design Crowd, although they have used it as well. You can start a project on Design Crowd for as little as $99. And if you go right now to designcrowd.com/health and wellness or enter the promo code health and wellness on their website, then our health and wellness listeners will receive up to $150 off of your design project. That's designcrowd.com/health and wellness or entering that promo code health and wellness.
Check out the show built around the women of MMA. From the UFC to the extreme cage fighting, we got the fights covered.
Listen.
It's the Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast. The latest news of upcoming fights, discussions of previous matches. Join us as we talk to and about the biggest names in women's mixed martial arts, past, present, and future. When it's the women's fight game, you know where to listen to. The Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast.
And welcome back to the news brief. And so, it is coming in from MMAfighting.com. It is the morning report of Bob Arum at Oscar De La Hoya react to the UFC's aggressive return schedule. So it's showing an image of Dana White pointing, which I find really amusing here. So for the last 2 months, the coronavirus has wreaked havoc on the sports world, canceling nearly all sporting events across the globe. That will change this weekend, though, as the UFC will return to action this Saturday with UFC 249, and then follow that up with 2 more events of the following week. It's an ambitious return to action for the worldwide leader in MMA, and not everyone is happy about it. UFC President Dana White's aggressive return plan for the UFC has drawn criticism from a number of parties, and on the eve of the UFC's return, boxing promoter and longtime rival Bob Arum has joined the fray, essentially calling Dana White's actions reckless during the global pandemic. Good luck to them, Arum told BoxingScene.com. I just hope they're not endangering the safety of anyone, but this kind of coward behavior doesn't do anybody any good. We're looking now with Nevada, which we'll do in a sensible way, or California. We're working with Nevada's Bob Bennett and California's Andy Foster, and we're talking to the Texas Commission. We're going to do this if it's safe for the fighters and everyone's involved, if it's approved by the medical authorities. We're not going to be cowboys like Dana White. I don't want to get politics involved, but I have really very little respect for Dana and what he's doing. White and Arum have a long history of taking shots in the media and at one another, most recently with Arum lambasting White for attempting to keep UFC 249 on schedule despite the coronavirus and myriad of setbacks it has presented. In that instance, White has also been forced to back down after politicians reached out to ESPN and Disney execs and had them intervene, but this time things appear to be full steam ahead with UFC 249 taking place in Florida, a state that has deemed live sports as essential services. Note here that Florida does deem the WWE a pro wrestling show, which pretty much to me is physical theatrical theater to a more extreme sense. That is considered essential services. But just because it's going to happen and do so with the blessing of the state doesn't mean Arum thinking holding fights right now is a good idea. In fact, he's worried that if something goes wrong, it could screw things up for everyone. If you want to dive deeper into like what's going on in Florida and why does it consider UFC and the WWE as essential businesses, I recommend you do actually. There's a lot to expand upon this when it comes to like political affiliations and representatives that involve the president of the United States, like Linda McMahon, Vince McMahon, Dana White are they hold. So strangely enough, they hold some connection or some power that they can go have influence onto the governor of Florida, DeSantis, and then DeSantis is calling them essential services because they're providing advertising money. It's very complicated and kind of confusing and also pretty dark. I argue that's pretty unethical, but that's just how things are. I think the behavior, this coming from Arum, I think the behavior of people in sports we should be following, Arum said, are Adam Silver of the NBA, Roger Goodell of the NFL, people who are proceeding cautiously and safely, not people who are acting like cowboys. For example, the UFC wanted to do this fight in California, and they were prevented by the governor, Gavin Newsom, and Senator Dianne Feinstein going to ESPN and having Dana pull the plug. My rebuttal to that, though, is that UFC, boxing, mixed martial arts, and the WWE, their order of operations, although they are the biggest organizations within their own field, in the grand scheme of sports, they're really small time. We can accept that. We really can. Even though UFC is the number one leader of mixed martial arts in the entire world. Even though boxing is the largest draw globally around the world. Though the way how they manage and how they organize their events are way less complicated than the NBA, NFL, and NHL and MLB. Because you're not dealing with like one billionaire, or you're not dealing with like a small collection of group of people, or you're not dealing with a pre-tape show. Boxing, WWE and UFC, mixed martial arts, all the events for those sports are pretty much impromptu to an extent, in that you don't have to schedule things 10 years in advance. You don't have to schedule things a year in advance. You can schedule things within the span of a month. Like UFC 249, that card was built off just a month of planning. That's the honest. Yes, like Dana White would say, well, we've been thinking about just engaging to fight against Ferguson for a year. And yeah, we've all been thinking about that, but it wasn't set in stone for a year. Gaethje versus Ferguson was an idea that's been thrown around for a year, but the actual, like, this fight happening was only scheduled about a couple weeks ago. It's about, just about a month ago, really. I think less than a month, 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks ago. And so, Gaethje versus Ferguson, that can be scheduled, that can be in a scheduled event, a scheduled fight, that can happen in just 1 month's time. NBA, there's a lot of things that have to go on with that. You got summer camp. You got summer camp for the rookies. You got the NBA draft to go deal with. You got NCAA. You got training camp training camp drills to go bring the new players. There's also an expansion going on right now with their G League. You got players who through their union have a designated amount of time that they want off within the season that you gotta go oblige, or else you gotta pay them more money though. And unlike boxing and UFC and the WWE, there actually is a union for the NBA, and the athletes of the NBA are making bank right now because of this union. and there's just so much. So you have to schedule about playoff. You have to schedule playoffs though. You want to make sure the playoffs are the best they can be. If things are not going well for the playoffs, then ratings go down. Not only do ratings go down, players are not going to perform in these playoffs, and that leaves an asterisk. With that, in the span of like 20, 30, 40 years from now on, people can look back at history, and this moment in time to which there's an asterisk. Like, there's so much involved in the NBA's planning that they just can't be like, oh, by the way, playoffs or finals are happening in 2 weeks. It just doesn't happen like that. Or it's like, oh man, next month we're gonna have the NBA finals, or or the playoffs are gonna start soon. Or it'll be like, oh, in 2 months' time we're gonna have the NBA draft just happen in New York all of a sudden. No, it's not like that. There's a lot of technicalities that are parts when it comes to season-based sporting shows. So he's talking about when Abrams talking about how Adam Silver and Roger Goodell are proceeding cautiously with the NFL and the NBA, it's because those commissioners have to deal with a lot more complicated issues and aspects about their sports that are much more complicated than the world of combat sports. That's what I gotta say. And WWE it's pre-taped, pre-scheduled. It's a fake wrestling show. That's what it is. It's a fake wrestling show to which there's a new script that's happening the day of. Alright, then you're not gonna, I can guarantee you, Vince McMahon didn't write a script and then that same script was able to follow through within a year later. That's not how it works. So I disagree I disagree with AM definitely when it comes to saying, like, hey man, UFC and combat sports should be like Adam Silver and Roger Goodell. No, it can't be. It turned out one of the fighters, in fact, tested positive afterwards for coronavirus. You know, if we get something like that on one of Dana's shows, and God forbid there's a serious incident of spreading the disease, it doesn't do well for anybody who's involved with the sports. And once again, my argument against that is that there are many fighters in the UFC, hundreds, and you look at the fighter, you look who he's interacted with, and you compare and contrast that with fighters who are currently competing right now, who are set to perform in the next upcoming event. Then you test out those fighters, and you'll see if those fighters and people that fighter has interacted with are all healthy. That's how things work in mixed martial arts. And once again, unlike the NBA, unlike the NHL, unlike the MLB, unlike the NFL, unlike those sports that have seasons, it's a lot easier to micromanage combat sports leagues than it is to manage those sporting leagues because there are a lot less variables that are happening here. So yes, one fighter did get the coronavirus, but since that fighter isn't part of a season or part of a major sports team, it's easy to micromanage and you can deal with the situation a lot more easier. So Aram talks about it, and he's like, I don't agree with this, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, Oscar De La Hoya goes more into it, though. Oscar De La Hoya, who is pretty much nearly famous for Dana White ranting about De La Hoya. So I know De La Hoya for being A, fighter, and B, that one guy that Dana White always keeps ripping and calls him a cokehead, which is pretty inappropriate, but it's really funny. I'll get into what Oscar De La Hoya has said about Dana White, about this upcoming UFC event, coming up right after the short break here.
You really can't underestimate the importance of having the right creative work for your brand or your product. Whether it's a logo, a website, a book cover, or an ad campaign, you really need a quality design to make that big difference pop and deliver your overall engagement and success in a competitive market. That's where Design Crowd comes in. Design Crowd has over 750,000 designers from Sydney to San Francisco, ready to help you with awesome creative ideas. They make crowdsourcing work for you. So if you need a logo or you're working on your creative branding, you can go to designcrowd.com and post a brief describing the design you need. And then within about 2 to 7 days, you'll receive up to over 100 different designs from designers around the world. Then you pick the best design and approve payment to the designer. So you're only paying for the design that you want. It takes a lot of the guesswork out of freelancing and out of crowdsourcing. And you don't have to be a huge company like Harvard Business School to use Design Crowd, although they have used it as well. You can start a project on Design Crowd for as little as $99. And if you go right now to designcrowd.com/health and wellness or enter the promo code health and wellness on their website, then our health and wellness listeners will receive up to $150 off of your design project. That's designcrowd.com/health and wellness or entering that promo code health and wellness.
This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
And welcome back to the news brief here. You're listening to the GSMC MMA podcast. So I talked about Bob Arum talking his concerns about UFC 249 and saying that Dana White has a cowboy mentality when it comes to the event. And I kind of agree with him though, but I don't agree with Arum's arguments about comparing mixed martial arts, how their situation is with the NBA and the NFL. I really don't though. Combat sports is much different to manage compared to the NBA and NFL. And yes, although I myself am not a manager, I have never managed the UFC. I have never managed the NBA team other than virtually through like NBA 2K20 and 2K19. But I don't need to be a manager for either of those two organizations to recognize that handling that the events that are happening and how they are organized for combat sports is much different from a season sport like the NFL and the NBA. Very, very different. And so, in this article here by MMAfighting.com, Arum goes on to talk about extensively about Lyman Good. Arum is referencing Lyman Good to withdraw from UFC 249 due to an injury, but later revealed it was actually a coronavirus. A fighter contracting coronavirus and competing at a UFC event would be the worst case scenario, but Dana White has been adamant that the UFC has been taking extreme precautions to combat the spread of COVID-19, which includes testing, minimum exposure, and maximum isolation. If you guys have not seen the UFC event in Brasilia, that event was definitely weird in the sense that it was fighters and their small team going to this empty arena, going to this octagon, and it's just those guys, the announcer, and the referee. It felt very strange to watch a UFC event without any fans, and I can expect the same thing happening again over here. So, but Bob Arum does not speak for the whole of the boxing world. In fact, one of Arum's chief promotional rivals, Oscar De La Hoya, is ready to praise White for his efforts, even despite their own turbulent background. I commend and respect Dana White, Oscar De La Hoya told Brian Campbell. We did have our differences. When I want to get involved with MMA, and I did Chuck Liddell versus Tito Ortiz, which was a huge success, I dipped my toes into the water and experienced it, and it was actually wonderful. I love MMA. No. No, De La Hoya. It's really, wow. Even till now, he's saying Chuck Liddell versus Tito Ortiz was it successful? Because I have not heard a single thing about Oscar De La Hoya continuing on and pushing forward for MMA. I don't think so. You know, even though Tito Ortiz was defending De La Hoya a lot, I agree with Dana White's sentiments in the fact that a lot of these fighters, just like the UFC, aren't paid all that well. They really aren't. My friends make more money than a lot of mixed martial artists working their minimum wage job than they do fighting for Golden Boy Productions and fighting the undercard for the UFC. And here's Oscar De La Hoya saying, hey, Chuck Liddell versus Tito Ortiz, man, it was a huge success. Success for you, but I don't think it was a good thing for the fighters. Did the fighters get anything out of it, though? Not really. Chuck Liddell looked awful in that fight. It was an embarrassment, and it was frightening to watch Chuck Liddell versus Tito Ortiz. Chuck Liddell looked like a broken man that if you were to push... Okay, have you ever, been in a fight ever, and then you push them, and you can tell when someone is going to fight or flight mode after pushing them. So if you push somebody and then they immediately get right back up, then you're like, oh man, he's ready to fight. But if you push somebody and then they're down there and then they give that dim the headlights look, that a lot of people have the tendency of doing if they get into a fight, if they've never been in a fight and then they've been pushed and they have that dim the headlights look, or they look very shocked, like, oh my gosh, how could this happen to me? It happens when like a mom or a dad pushes their like 5-year-old kid in the ground, and the kid is all shocked and starts crying and stuff. That happens for a lot of people, even when they're adults, when you're 20 years old, 30 years old, 50 years old. I've seen 50-year-old women who have been engaged in fights and have been pushed down, and then they give the deer in the headlights look, and then they just stay down, and they just have no clue what to do next. That's how I saw Chuck Liddell. Yes, Chuck Liddell is a former champion. Yes, Chuck Liddell is one of the toughest fighters of all time in history. He's one of the greatest fighters. Chuck Liddell versus Mauricio Shogun Rua got me into mixed martial arts. That's how much I love Chuck Liddell. When I played the UFC games, Chuck Liddell was the only guy I chose. So I love Liddell. And then when I saw him fight against Tito Ortiz, that had to be the worst performance I've ever seen from any fighter ever. I would rather see a fighter get knocked out in 18 seconds, because at least that fighter had like a strategy going into the fight. It just didn't turn out well for him. Or he was putting his arms up in the right time, or the other fighter was exceptionally good. But no, this is like a 40-year-old Tito Ortiz versus a 40-something-year-old Chuck Liddell. There was no reason for these two to keep on fighting. And Liddell's a wee bit younger than Liddell. And Liddell, like, I swear, if you saw how Chuck Liddell punched, if Chuck Liddell were to punch a birthday cake, he wouldn't put a single dent in it. That's how weak it looked. So no, Oscar, I don't agree with you in the fact that this fight is, that it was a great experience. No, I don't accept that. He goes on to say Dana came out and criticized me and ridiculed me and all that stuff, but you know what? Dana is doing a phenomenal job in defending his sport and growing his sport, and he's doing it big. He's doing it great. I commend him. Whether anyone can truly make fighting in the time of coronavirus safe is up for debate, but regardless, the show will go on this weekend as UFC 249 will take place at the Viceroy Veterans Memorial Arena in Jacksonville, Florida this Saturday. I'm gonna watch it. Hopefully, all of you guys are gonna go watch it. Strangely enough, though, Justin Gaethje says like he wouldn't have accepted the fight on short notice. Well, he did accept the fight on short notice. This is coming in from MMAJunkie.com, and the fact that Justin Gaethje says here that Justin Gaethje wasn't going to step in on short notice for anyone, but the highlight is Nick Game changed his mind. After the UFC lightweight champion Khabib Nurmagomedov was forced out of UFC 249 versus Tony Ferguson due to the travel ban restrictions in Russia, Gaethje offered to step in. Interestingly, he said stance would have been different if it was a fight against the undisputed champ. I don't think I would have taken the fight against Khabib on short notice. Matchup wise, I think I have a much better chance of touching Tony's chin than Khabib in the first 2-3 rounds, Gaethje explained. In order to get taken down once or twice by Khabib and work up and still be able to fight, I really do need at least 10 weeks. You know, I have been training my whole life, but there's a certain lactic acid that builds up that really that you really have to account for. No matter what this is, not perfect circumstances, but a fight is a fight. When it was on a 14-day notice, that was much different than now, or a 20-day notice. Now I've had 5 weeks to train. It's not what I've asked for or wanted, but I do believe that before this, I was in better shape. I didn't let myself go. I was telling myself since the beginning of the year, I was going to fight again, and it was going to be a big fight. So interesting saying that Gaethje wouldn't have accepted a fight against Khabib. And that's very understandable. Tony Ferguson, Khabib Nurmagomedov. So, despite the fact that Justin Gaethje has a really good wrestling background and a wrestling pedigree, and I still say that as good as a wrestler he is, or even as good as many wrestlers are, Khabib Nurmagomedov is a generational talent. He is without a doubt the best he's the best ground-based fighter. He's the best ground-based fighter. Second best ground-based fighter would be Tony Ferguson. Third would be Charles Oliveira. Those are my top 3 best ground-based fighters in the lightweight division. And when you look at Khabib Nurmagomedov, his wrestling ability is so phenomenal, so great that it's that you have to be prepped up for a long time. You got to be training for months in order to have a chance against Khabib's wrestling. And I understand Tony Ferguson is the easier matchup. I think in most cases, most people in the lightweight division, if they were to ask, who would you rather fight? Would you rather fight against Tony Ferguson, or would you rather fight against Khabib? Because here's the thing, I'm not disrespecting or discounting how good of a fighter Max Holloway and Tony Ferguson have the same tattoos, so I kind of mistake them sometimes. But But Ferguson is an easier matchup for most people generally. Because if you look at for all of Ferguson's fights, Ferguson's beatable. Tony Ferguson, like, there are moments or there are brief points in time in all those fights they can go and say, wow, Ferguson can actually lose this fight. When he fought against Kevin Lee, a lot of people speculated Kevin Lee would go win that fight, and I wouldn't have been surprised if Kevin Lee did defeat Tony Ferguson, but Ferguson had the comeback victory against Kevin Lee, and now Kevin Lee right now he's pretty much out of the UFC. Currently right now he's taking a break. He's not even in the rankings at this moment, I think. But most people would definitely want to fight against Tony Ferguson, would rather fight Ferguson than Khabib, because if you want to fight against Khabib, man, you gotta be training, gotta be prepped, you gotta get ready for him. So, I understand Gaethje here, but you know what? He's a fighter, and he's gonna have a fun fight regardless. He's gonna have a fun fight against Ferguson, and I definitely can't wait. So you're listening to the GSMC MMA podcast, coming back right after the short break.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
And welcome back to the GSMC MMA podcast. You are listening to today's news brief, and this is being reported in from BloodyElbow.com. Reported UFC to conduct diagnostic swab and antibody COVID-19 tests upon arrival. So we've talked about how there are other promoters talking about how the UFC and Dana White has this cowboy mentality and how it's not safe to go and push forward for these MMA events to continue happening despite social distancing and states being under lockdown for now in the month of May. But it's reported that UFC will reportedly test fighters and cornermen upon arrival at the host hotel. So the UFC is hosting a trio of events in Jacksonville, Florida amid the coronavirus pandemic, starting with UFC 249 this Saturday. Safety has been naturally a main concern by many, but Dana White and UFC officials have mostly kept any specific medical screening and testing details private. More light is being shed about this now, though, with a new report from ESPN stating the promotion will indeed be conducting COVID-19 tests. According to the report, the UFC will administer both the diagnostic swab coronavirus test as well as the antibody test to fights and their for fighters and their cornermen as soon as they arrive at the host hotel in Jacksonville, Florida. Until those results come back in, they'll reportedly be asked not to mingle in large groups and try to self-isolate within reason. Also, upon arrival, the fighters and cornermen will be informed of the medical and safety procedures for the week. As revealed earlier, this includes daily temperature checks and medical questionnaires during their mandatory screenings. According to Dr. Donald Muzzy, president of the Association of Ringside Physicians, ARP, fighters might have different scheduled times for weigh-ins to prevent larger gatherings in the venue. Although experts have already noted how COVID-19 tests doesn't really eliminate the risk involved, having everyone involved undergo multiple tests doesn't lessen it. There are pros and cons to the two tests mentioned, but having multiple tests is certainly very good for development. Antibody tests. As the name suggests, there are blood tests that look for antibodies that generally arise 4 days to more than a week after infection. You can get quick results in just a few minutes. But they aren't reliable, though. They also are not used to diagnose current disease, as it mainly checks if you've already had the virus. There are also multiple types of antibody tests of varying quality and accuracy. They've been known to give many false positives and given people a false sense of immunity to the virus. Testing negative for COVID-19 antibodies also doesn't rule out the chance you could have an active infection, so one could be spreading the virus without even knowing it. The second testing, diagnostic swab. Diagnostic swabs, or polymerase chain reaction PCR tests, are swabs that are inserted deep into the person's nasal cavities. They are generally the most reliable test currently available, but it still isn't perfect. A few days may pass before the virus replicates in the throat and nose, so these tests can cause false negatives as it won't identify someone who has recently been infected. These are also said to sometimes fail to pick up signs of active infection. Another issue is that the samples are generally sent to labs and can take multiple days for results to come in. There are speedier PCR tests that can get results in minutes, which the UFC could use, but accuracy is still in question, with early studies showing to have 15% false negatives. Since they have a policy above asking fighters not to mingle until the results come out, we can assume that they are not using the quicker PCR tests that happen in just a few minutes. This would mean results from those tests would be more accurate, but it would also mean it will take longer to get results. This can pose some potential issues with the varying arrival times of fighters in the coming weeks. According to ESPN, most fighters will arrive by plane Tuesday or Wednesday, with others taking the drive to Jacksonville, Florida, and arriving on a different day. Donald Cerrone has reportedly plans to use his RV and arrive just in time for Friday's weigh-ins. All in all, the tests, especially individually, still pose some risks. These are questions on when and how often these will be conducted, and whether the UFC would be completely transparent with these results and its testing. That being said, this information is very good development, as two kinds of tests combined all the other safety protocols would indeed lessen the chance of infection. Whether that lessened the risk would be satisfactory could depend on which expert you ask, but the association ringside physicians seem to be agreeable with these precautions. So yes, people are making the claim that UFC and Dana White are going for this cowboy gung-ho mentality, but, it turns out Dana White is indeed taking care of his fighters. There have been other fighters like Francis Ngannou who have talked about how the UFC has been taking care of them. So while there is all this negative backlash onto Dana White that is a wee bit warranted, not all of it should be warranted, and that he is trying to take care of his fighters. He is following safety precautions, and he's doing his best to decrease the chances of coming away from this event with a huge infection or a huge story that could happen. And if he's following all the right safety procedures, and it is legal in the state of Florida, whether you agree with Florida and how DeSantis is organizing on what is considered essential businesses, even if you disagree with him at an ethical level, Dana White is not breaking any rules. He's following the legal procedures, and he's doing the best he can to go put MMA back out there. And I miss my MMA, so I can a wee bit respect that. So UFC 249, it is being taken care of. It's not like this fighter is coming in, they're gonna fight, and then that's it. No, like, these fighters are gonna come in, they're gonna be tested, and if Justin Gaethje or Dominic Cruz were infected, I can guarantee you they're not gonna fight. That's how Dana White is not gonna throw in fighters who are infected just to have an event happen, because I don't think he's that short-sighted. He's that short-sighted of a promoter. And so the fighters coming in, officially the betting odds are out for all fights. I've talked about the betting odds before, but now officially all the betting odds are out. So let's look at them right now. Tony Ferguson is the favorite against Justin Gaethje at minus 170. Henry Cejudo is the favorite against Dominic Cruz at minus 240. Ngannou is the favorite against Rosenstrike. The biggest odds... Okay, so the two biggest odds winners here would be Ryan Spann, who is coming in this fight as a major favorite with minus 380, and Ngannou with minus 270. So those are the two fights where pretty much it's almost guaranteed they're going to win. But there's one fight here that's minus 310 that I'm going to get into detail later on as to why I disagree with it. Calvin Kattar is the favorite against Jeremy Stephens, and the Pettis is the favorite against Donald Cerrone. Greg Hardy is the favorite against Jurgen De Castro. Fabricio Verdum is the favorite against Aleksei Oleinik at minus 310. Minus 310. So it's overwhelmingly majority that Verdum is going to defeat Oleinik, which is very astounding to me. Carlos Esparza is the favorite against Michelle Watterson. Jacare Souza is the favorite against Uriah Hall with minus 125. Vicente Luque is a huge favorite with minus 265, which is pretty surprising, against Nico Price. Bryce Mitchell is the favorite of minus 175 versus Charles Rosa. And number one here, Ryan Spann is the favorite at minus 380 versus Sam Alvey. Most of these make sense to me. Most of the predictions here are what I would agree with this. 3 fights that I definitely am not agree, and no, 4 fights I'm not really in much agreement here is Carlos Esparza versus Michelle Watterson. Michelle Watterson did lose against Joanna Jacek, but it was a very game Joanna, and I think and Michelle Watterson, She has the skills, the abilities, and the tools. It just she came to the fight with the wrong strategy. So I'm putting in Waterson defeating Carla Esparza. Carla Esparza's wrestling and Carla Esparza's striking ability has improved, but I don't think it's improved substantially enough, along with her wrestling ability, to go defeat Michelle Waterson. Verdum versus Alaska Oleinik. Really? So Verdum is coming off after a suspension here. He might have some ring rust. And he's the overwhelming favorite against Oleinik. And yes, Verdum is a major name, and he's one of the best of all time. He's one of the greatest of all time. He defeated against Fedor Emelianenko, and he's a former world champion. Like, without a doubt, Verdum is a future UFC Hall of Famer, without a doubt. But him coming off his rust, though, rust is a huge aspect into me and how I predict these fights. And they aren't necessarily the best reasons, but it is a reason. And I think it should be closer. I say Verdum is going to defeat Oleinik, but I don't think it's that much of a favorite for him to defeat Oleinik, and it wouldn't be that much of a stretch for Oleinik to defeat Verdum. Greg Hardy versus Jurgen Castro. This could go either way. This could really go either way here. Greg Hardy, I think he's been humbled in his past couple fights, and because of that, he's going to fight a lot more safer here, and we're not going to see that aggressive Greg Hardy, which you kind of need to do when you're out of the rankings. Anthony Pettis is a favorite against Don Cerrone. That's surprising to me. It really is. It's because Don Cerrone lost decisively in his last fights, and I'm picking Cerrone to defeat Pettis, really. If you look at the fights beyond the Conor fight, if you just look at all of Don Cerrone's fights before that Conor McGregor fight, which is a really, really bad performance, I think he's had a better string of fights than Anthony Pettis has accumulatively. If you look at the past 5 fights of Pettis versus the past 5 fights of Cerrone, I would lean towards Cerrone being more game to go fight against Pettis here. Yes, Cerrone had a bad performance against McGregor, but my prediction is for Cerrone to go bounce back and defeat Pettis. And so we'll be right back with some more MMA news right here, the GSMC MMA Podcast.
This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
And welcome back. You're listening to the GSMC MMA Podcast. This is being reported in from MMAmania.com that Don Cerrone wants revenge against Anthony Pettis for kicking my liver out of my body. Don Cerrone is excited to face Anthony Pettis yet again, even if the former lightweight champion dealt him one of the most painful defeats of his career. Last time these guys fought was 7 years ago today. It's been an up and down career for a couple of years for Don Cerrone. After a 1-4 run coming into 2018, he pulled off 3 gutsy wins against tough opponents to place himself back into the pack right at the top of the division. Unfortunately, that pack included Tony Ferguson, Justin Gaethje, and Conor McGregor. All 3 beat him, with Gaethje and McGregor putting Cowboy down in the first round. Now, Cerrone's looking to return back to his winning days and UFC 249. But it will be against an opponent who has already defeated him, Anthony Pettis, finishing him in the first round with a liver kick back in 2013. It finished the 6th round in Donald's mind. He kicked my liver out of my body in our first fight. Cerrone said in an interview with MMA Junkie, "It sucked. Of course, you always want to get a loss back, but it's stylistically a good matchup. It's a good fight, with good fun. It's a fight that people want to see. I'm going out there looking for a win," Cerrone continued. 3 losses is the worst thing I've ever done. It's such a crazy and wild sport, the ups and downs. This is my wheelhouse, short notice fights. I want to win, go out there and do what I do. I'm excited for this fight and for this matchup. But don't think just because of the short notice nature of the fight and the coronavirus situation, Cerrone isn't training hard. Seneca head coach John Wood moved out to BMF Ranch to get Cowboy ready for his rematch. And he likes what he sees. He's looking great. He's got fire lit under his butt right now, Wood told MMA Junkie. I think coming off that last loss, it's not sitting well with him. And from what I see, fired up and ready to go and motivated. We're training 2 or 3 times a day right now, hitting in the morning, working afternoon and night, and he seems to be enjoying it yet again. He seems to be enjoying the process and enjoying it himself. So I think you're going to be seeing a super motivated Don Cerrone here in there, and I think he's going to go in there and get it done for sure. Losing sucks, and he's not a guy that likes to lose, Wood continued, and people can say whatever they want. That fight. That just happens sometimes. You go out there and Conor's one of the best in the world, you get into a fight and things go the way you want. Don't go the way you want. You get hit quick, it can change everything until something's gotten into the cage with another human and been kneed in the face or elbowed. Your whole game plan can change like that. It can be over. So I think you just have to go in and kind of forget about the past. He's fired up, he's ready to go, he's looking good right now. Anthony Pettis is in a very similar situation with losing as all these days. The former WEC and UFC lightweight champion is 4-8 over the past 5 years, and coming into UFC 249 is on a 2-fight losing streak. Who'll be more motivated to get back in the winning track, Don Cerrone or Anthony Pettis? Well, my prediction here would be Don Cerrone, because when you look back in the fights, I'll do a further analysis of this when it comes to the next podcast show, to which I start reviewing all the fights, and I'll see how the matchups go. But stylistically, this is the best matchup for both Pettis and Cerrone. The Anthony Pettis, who he was 7 years ago, is much... Like, Anthony Pettis has slowed down significantly a lot in the past 7 years. Because when you look back to Pettis versus Cerrone, I say Cerrone now is a better fighter now than he was 7 years ago, without a doubt. I think Cerrone is a lot more smarter as he fights. He's better in his boxing, his angling, and understanding distances and trying to figure out the best angles to go pick out shots for jabs and strikes. He is a lot more better of a dynamic all-around striker, Cerrone is right now, than he was 7 years ago. I think Cerrone is a much more smarter fighter, and I think he's going to bring it to Pettis. Pettis, who he was 7 years ago, was a lot more faster. One would say Anthony Pettis was the best lightweight in the entire world. And if you look at Anthony Pettis right now, he slowed down a lot more significantly. When his striking ability, although it's on point, isn't as precise or isn't as strong as he was 7 years ago. So even though Pettis is coming into the fight against Don Cerrone as the favorite, both these fighters are both coming off a loss, and both of them need this win. Really, both of them are pretty much at the journeyman kind of position right now in the UFC. So both fighters desperately need a win here, and for my prediction, I say Don Cerrone is going to defeat Pettis. If you were to say who would win, peak Pettis versus peak Cerrone, without a doubt, 10 times out of 10, I would pick Anthony Pettis. The best version of Anthony Pettis is one of the best fighters in the entire world. Without a doubt, a top 3. If you were to bring the Anthony Pettis from 2013 and bring him right now, he is a top 5 fighter, or arguably top 3. I could see him defeat the likes of Conor McGregor, to defeat the likes of Don Cerrone, to defeat Tony Ferguson, to defeat Justin Gaethje. But Anthony Pettis right now in 2020, on how he slowed down significantly, and for that reason, when you look at the past 5 fights of Pettis versus the past 5 fights of Cerrone, who slowed down the most, who's had the more impressive performances all around, I'd go for Don Cerrone. So that's the reason why I choose Cerrone over Anthony Pettis at UFC 249. But you know what? This is the UFC. Anything can happen. For all we know, we could have a Showtime kick. Maybe. I don't think it's going to happen. But you know what? Anything can happen in the UFC. And also considering the fact that Don Cerrone, if you haven't heard his recent interview, where he was talking with ESPN MMA, and he was talking about how he just wasn't into the fight against Conor McGregor. And when you look at the fight against, even when you're looking at the press conferences for McGregor versus Cerrone was way too relaxed, was way too chill. Because usually Cowboy would be like, hey man, I love fighting, this is what I do, man, but I'm gonna beat you up. Instead, when it was Conor versus Cerrone's press conference was like, hey man, yeah, I like fighting, let's do this, whatever. Even though it was, without a doubt, the biggest fight in Cerrone's career, he was just not motivated, and maybe that's a sign. That could be a red flag, which is why I think a lot of people are doubting Cerrone in the next fight here. And the fact that the red flag for Cerrone was like, hey man, in his past 3 fights, he's always been like, hey, I got a couple years left in me. I want to go for the title. Hopefully I do, but I don't have that many fights in me left. I'm getting pretty old. Hey, me versus Conor McGregor. Yeah, that's a pretty fun fight for me. I'm gonna go in there. I'm gonna do my best, and yeah, because I don't think there's ever. I don't remember any scenario in that McGregor versus Cerrone fight to which Cerrone was like, "Yeah, I'm gonna go beat you." Instead, he's like, hey, I'm going to go in there and we're going to have a fun show. And yeah. So yeah, Cerrone was just not motivated in that fight against McGregor for reasons unknown. In this fight against Pettis, both Pettis and Cerrone both have reasons as to why they should try to win this fight. They really should. Pettis is still younger than Cerrone, so he's got a couple years left in him. Maybe Cerrone is really thinking about it. Maybe Cerrone is really thinking hey man, I think I really do need to retire really soon. I don't think I have this in me that much. And so hopefully we see Cowboy Donald Cerrone, not relaxed Donald Cerrone, for this upcoming fight here. Meanwhile, though, from the Duke Roufus camp here, it is being said that Anthony Pettis, this is the best version we've seen of him in a while. This is coming in from BJPen.com, to which Duke Roufus, who's training with Anthony Pettis, says this is the best Anthony Pettis he's seen in a while. He goes on to talk about that despite the two having a good friendship, and that Cerrone and Pettis are good friends to each other, that's why they're not really talking too much smack. Roufus says that once Pettis arrives for the fight, it'll be all business. I think once we get there, Anthony's going to be the professional that he is, and it's not going to be that friendly. He's not going to be rude, he's not going to make an ass of himself, but he's going to be there all business. I know Cowboy likes that, but how we beat Cowboy at the first time, I kind of studied Cowboy psychology too. He's a great fighter, and all these fighters are great, but they all have different unique strengths and weaknesses, and understanding the psychological warfare of it all, it's an interesting part too. Heading to UFC 249, Duke Roufus knows that both Anthony Pettis and Donald Cerrone have a lot on the line with the big opportunity ahead of them, and even though they're friends, it's all business once fight time arrives. And so Duke Roufus has a lot of confidence in towards Pettis, while at the same time Woods has a lot of confidence in Donald Cerrone, who's going to win this fight. This might be the best fight of the entire night. It might be the most exciting fight of the entire night. I'm excited overall for UFC 249, to be honest with you. We got multiple Fight of the Night contenders here. We got multiple performances of the night bonuses here. For all we know, there could be 5 fights that happen in the main card that all end via first round TKO. It could definitely happen. Or it could be 5 rounds or 3 rounds of absolute insanity, of fighters going all out, going crazy. I wouldn't be surprised if Cerrone vs. Pettis ends via split decision after 3 rounds. I am that confident both of these fighters are going to bring to the table, and I'm excited for it. I really am. And well, since I'm in a good mood here, I'm going to try out a quiz here, and it says, what type of fighter are you? Well, UFC 249 is right around the corner. I'm in a good mood, so I want to try something fun, quirky, and dumb. So let's try this out. You're listening to the GSMC MMA podcast, coming back right after the short break here.
Want to know the latest in soccer? Then listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Soccer Podcast. From MLS, the World Cup, and the Premier League, we've got you covered. The latest updates, the hottest matches, and news on the league's top players. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Soccer Podcast.
David Beckham scores the goal to take England all the way to the World Cup finals.
Listen now.
And we are back. So as customary to all my podcasts, I always end off here taking a quiz, whether it be a questionnaire quiz saying, hey, what type of fighter are you going to be if you were to go compete in the UFC? What type of MMA fan are you? Are you a knowledgeable MMA fan? How much do you know about the UFC? How much do you know about Pride? How much do you know about Bellator? And so I found a quiz here from ProSportsQuiz.com. What is your favorite type of fighter to watch? So it's called Which UFC Fighter Are You 2020 quiz. It is written by Ryan Gunn. It is so it was released March 26th of 2019. So it's relatively new here. But if you want to know what fighter you would be if you were in the UFC, I recommend you try it out. It is for fun here. It's for giggles. So let's see what type of fighter I would be if I was a UFC fighter. So first question, it's going to ask you a series of questions here, and based on those questions, it's going to tell you what type of fighter you are going to be. Every time I take these questionnaires, it always leads to me being called, hey, Arnel De Leon, you could be the next Conor McGregor because of these 5 questions, and I'm always puzzled by that. I'm also really puzzled by these answers that they give me. So first question, what is your favorite type of fighter to watch? The dominant wrestler, the submission specialist, entertaining striker, one good shot and it's over, or other? What type of other UFC fighter would there be then? I love the fighter that stands still and we go for 5 rounds towards a unanimous decision. Yeah, that's my favorite fighter. No, everyone loves an entertaining striker. Everyone loves that. How much trash talking do you do? I talk trash all day, every day, or only if I hate my opponents, or I don't talk trash and I always respect my opponents. I talk trash every day. Even this morning, I was talking trash to my friends as it pertains to like video games and like life stuff. So I talk trash every day if possible. It is so fun getting under people's nerves. I understand why people don't like Chael Sonnen or Ben Askren or like when they talk smack to other people. But if you're very quippy, if you're very smart, and you know how to use like some words, and you're able to like hit a nerve onto your opponent, it's really enjoyable. I've participated in many tournaments where I've trash talked so much to the point I was able to go win out a couple games. What drives you the most in your life? Family, money, winning, my desire to improve, or fame? What drives you most right now? Money. Currently, right now, money. I'm still in my I'm in my 20s still, so trying to be economically stable is what's important to me right now. Choose what best describes you: cocky, intimidating, respectful, natural talent, role model, or anti-establishment. Alright, so to the viewers out there who are listening to this, what describes you? Remember, this is depending on your answer here, this will define what type of fighter you are. So, are you cocky, intimidating, respectful, natural talent, role model, anti-establishment? I am definitely not the best role model. I really am not. I'm anti-establishment for the most part. I was in a meeting last night with a group of people, and I am so jaded and cynical in this meeting. It was a meeting of 45 people. We were all doing a Google Meetups, and while everyone was talking or or cracking up a joke or slurring their words, I would always roll my eyes or do a yuck kind of to them. So I'm always like against the grain. I'm not contrarian for the sake of contrarian, but I tend to have contrasting views with other people. Am I a natural talent? No, I'm not a natural. I'm talented in many things, but I'm not a natural talent at it. Am I respectful? Only to the elders. I'm respectful only to my elders and no one else. Am I intimidating? If I trash talk to somebody and I get to their nerve, then I become intimidating. But the first answer here is cocky. I am cocky. I am more cocky than I am intimidating, respectful, or anything else. What would you say is your biggest flaw? I sometimes party too much. I sometimes let my emotions get the best of me. I don't take many risks. My cardio sucks. I swear a lot. None of the above. So a couple years ago, not a couple years ago, like many years ago. So many years ago, I would say my cardio sucks, but not really. Okay, it's one of those weird things where I suck at running. If I were to jog or to run for an X amount of time, I would be like really, like I would gas out within the matter of a couple minutes. But really enough though, like I have great cardio as it pertains to like lifting weights. Like I can go and like lift weights for about hours, and I would have fun doing it though. But my cardio sucks in the sense that if I were to like to run or to jog, for a while I'll get really tired. But if I were to do something like swimming or cycling or lifting weights, I could bench press and deadlift stuff for hours, and I could feel I would feel fine. Like I could deadlift for about an hour. Then I could deadlift again for another hour. Or I could start doing dumbbell curls for about an hour or 2 hours, and then do it. You do it again, really, like 3 more times in a single day. So my cardio is decent. That's what I'm gonna say. I don't take many risks. I do take many risks, actually. I do, strangely enough, though. I always try to do different things that my friends and my family don't do. I sometimes let my emotions get the best of me. Not really. I sometimes. My friends tell me that I struggle opening up sometimes. So I sometimes party too much. No, I am not a party person. I really don't. I like taking risks, but I don't like taking risks in a group of people. If that makes any much sense. I swear a lot. I used to swear a lot. I used to, not that much anymore. The answer here is none of the above. What would you say is your biggest flaw? None of the above. Which UFC fighter I am? Yep, here it is. I am Conor McGregor. Why does this always happen to me? Yikes. So apparently I'm always Conor McGregor. So I look further into this, and apparently in this trivia the answers are Ronda Rousey, George St. Pierre, or Randy Couture. That's very interesting. There are only 4 types of fighters you could potentially be. You could be Randy Couture, GSP. You could be. These are all future, except for Couture. I think he's a current UFC Hall of Famer, but these are all UFC Hall of Fame worthy people. That's how high my ceiling is. My ceiling is Conor McGregor. That is so weird. Ugh. Alright, well, I found another quiz here from Quiblo.com, and I'm gonna do these questions real quick here. Alright, it's only 5 questions. Depending on these answers, that's gonna define what type of fighter I would be if I were to be an MMA fighter. So, there's 1 minute left in the final round, and you think you may have won the fight. What do? Take your opponent down, let the clock tick down, go for a tap out, nothing to lose, get a few kicks in, but move around, throw some heavy punches. I will go throw some kicks in and move around. If I know I'm winning the fight, then I'm not gonna risk anything here. You are announced the winner. What do? Do you holler to the lights of the crowd, climb the Cajun pose, raise your hands and leave, yell and show your muscles. Yell and show my muscles. I do that when I play video games. Who are you more likely to have as a sponsor? Beef jerky, hunting gear, clothes, or an energy drink? None of those. I'll say none of those. I'll go for clothes then, because I know I can make bank with that at very most. You are in a press conference and are labeled underdog. You say, underdog. Oh, I'm a beast, just no underdog. Fair enough, but I'll make my case in the octagon. Whatever you say, I ain't getting knocked out. That's for sure. I will win this fight. You guys say that what you will, but I'll get the last laugh. Alright, I would say fair enough. I don't like people who make such a big fuss from questions, really, when it comes to the UFC press conferences. Do kids have your posters on your wall? What? Do kids have your posters on your wall? Oh, what's my reaction if a kid were to have a poster of me on the wall? I'd be like, for sure, if they watch it, I am so popular, yeah. Well, I would think so. I don't think so, but you never know. I don't know. I say, if someone had a poster of me, I'd be like, heck yeah, thank you. You are awarded a title match. You respond first by saying, woo, this title is coming home, baby. Say, I want to be the best. I do my best. Hit the octagon. Start a furious workout. Heck yeah. If I'm excited ever, I start running. Even though I suck at running, I do running if I'm excited. In a press conference, would you start a fight if provoked? No. You pay me to get to fights. I don't get, if I'm doing, you don't know. I'm not going to be in a fight if I don't get paid. No. I got too much respect for this. I am pushed to a certain, absolutely. What would you rather work on in your MMA training? Mostly upper body strength, work on kicks, but I need to work on defense on now, my punches, something to get, I'll work on kicks easily. I'll definitely work on kicks and defense more than anything else. Why do you fight? To make money! Heck yeah! What is your style? Boxer. I am definitely a boxer. Where are you from? I'm from the Southwest. How big are you? I'm about right now. I'm coming at 230 right now. I'm 232 right now, so I'm above 225, which is what they give me. I am Chuck Liddell, so it's either I'm Conor McGregor or I'm Chuck Liddell. Sweet. I'm an entertaining striker, and I'm happy about that at the very least. Yay me. So, thank you for tuning into the GSMC MMA podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'd like to ask that you please remember to subscribe to the show and write a nice review. That really helps us. Also, if you can please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Thank you, and have a good night.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts MMA Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. From movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.